Well, good morning, Living Streams, or afternoon, or evening, or whenever you're hanging with us.
Good summer.
Good summer. It is a good summer.
Streams.
We got that monsoon cutting the heat action going on right now. I mean, it's not cutting it out, but it's cutting it down a little bit. Did you get a little daytime rain yesterday?
Okay.
Oh, man. Was it yesterday or the day before? But earlier this week anyway. Yeah, we got some daytime sunny rain. Went running around in it over on our side of town.
Yeah,
pretty good.
I love it when it rains. But
yeah, it's good stuff, but you didn't get it. That's sad.
Not getting much, yeah.
Yeah, it was nice. I miss those daytime warm summer rains. We used to, when I was little, we get them all the time in Phoenix, but it's just, Phoenix got to be like 5 times bigger than it was when I was a kid. And all that, the heat bubble. You heard about that?
I mean, it's a theory I've heard of, and I believe in it.
Yeah, oh, no, I feel like I've seen it. The big old bubble over the city just because it's hot, all that concrete.
Yep. And
so the rain dumps on the outside, and you don't get to
run around. I
around.
don't think our average rainfall has changed, though.
You don't think so?
I mean, like if you look at the actual numbers.
I haven't looked at the number. Yeah.
But I like thinking about the heat bubble and how it's robbing me of my nonsense.
It's robbing me, yeah.
Nate Rupert always talks about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, who knows? I certainly remember a lot more rain, but I was little too, so.
Yeah.
But today this week, you brought us into Ruth chapter 3. Only one more Ruth. It's kind of a bummer Ruth is so short because I'm enjoying it a lot.
It's so good.
Yeah.
It's so
You want to give us a little flyover of a recap of your message?
Yeah, I started out with just kind of a little teaser on Ruth, talking a little bit about Benjamin Franklin and how he sat with some guys that were going over literature, which is, I guess, what you did before Netflix and Instagram and stuff. And he tricked them all into not realizing it was the book of Ruth. Mm-hmm. They were all so amazed by it, and he was like, haha, it's the book of Ruth.
Yeah.
Because it really is. It's an amazing piece of literature. And I mentioned that it's ancient Jewish romance literature. Mm-hmm. And, we don't know who wrote it or anything, but it's been part of Jewish culture, but actually the entire world's culture for so long preserved. And it's just a little book. And you don't really know why it has any kind of attention given to it until the last verses. The last couple verses where all of a sudden you realize, this is in the genealogy of King David, and for us as followers of Christ, we know that means it's the genealogy of Jesus as well. It's
kind of that like Marvel movie post-credit stitching into the multiverse moment there.
Yes.
A little bit.
Yes, multiverse for sure. And it's funny, this morning I've spent, a few hours writing my sermon for Ruth 4 this Sunday because it's Thursday. Mm-hmm. And we usually podcast Monday or Tuesday. Yeah. So I'm in the middle of all that, but that multiverse is a big part of Ruth chapter 4 because that's how it ends. You get to see how this is just a story within a grand narrative.
Yeah.
But the story in itself is not lacking in any credibility or value. Mm-hmm. So even without those last few verses connecting it to King David and all of that, there's still something so awesome about this story.
It's like a really good spinoff.
It's just, it's
that
really
stands
really
on
good.
its own.
Yeah, like Rogue One is the best Star Wars movie out there.
Or Young Sheldon. You watch Young Sheldon? Oh, that's a good one.
It's a good spinoff.
But Big Bang Theory spinoff.
But yeah, you didn't hear what I said?
Rogue One?
Yeah, it's the best Star Wars movie.
Did you want me to bite for that hot take?
Yeah,
it's good.
I just wanted to make as many people mad as I could.
I wouldn't say the best, but Rogue One.
It's a spinoff of all of the other episodes, but I think it's actually the best.
I remember thinking Rogue One was really boring until I realized what it was.
It was part of the grand narrative.
When I realized, this is like everyone's gonna die, then I was like, okay, I'm here.
And what they gave was what was needed for all of Star Wars to even happen.
Yeah,
Star Wars wouldn't have happened without Rogue One.
It's true.
But anyways, so that's it. But just by itself, it's this beautiful story of basically the romance, the proposal, the connection and love between Boaz and Ruth. And so we talked about that. And the Ruth 3 is the climax of that, where basically Ruth proposes to Boaz.
Yeah.
Which is challenging in 1,000 different ways. It's almost like the story of the Good Samaritan, where Jesus is like, Let me tell you a story about this Samaritan guy.
Yeah.
You know, and these where it's just layer after layer of offensive, like that cannot be.
Yeah.
That's, outlandish. And so Ruth is a Moabite
Mm-hmm.
in Israel, which scandalous.
Yeah.
Ruth is a widow who has no right. She's poor. She's nothing, no value at all. And then she's proposing,
Yeah.
to a man, and proposing to a field owner, to a wealthy man, an honorable man, a respectable man, a man in the whole community knows has integrity and is a great man. And then this little Moabite widow, poor, outcast foreigner is proposing marriage to him. And then he says, I would love to. I cannot believe you're doing this. This is so incredible. But there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And it ends. Ruth chapter 3 ends. So no one knows what happens.
Bum, bum, bum.
That gets us to Ruth 4, but we can't talk about that today.
Yeah. It's interesting hearing you describe him as that, because it's, because really there's, describe him as, honorable, wealthy, all that kind of stuff. But there's some guesswork a little bit, right? Like, we know he's wealthy. That's for sure.
Well, we know he owns a field, yeah.
Yeah, and he seems to be he clearly is a good man.
Mm-hmm.
We see his character on display. But also, he indicates that he's older.
Mm-hmm.
CJ was making the assumption that he's not married, which I think is probably accurate. It's possible he has other wives.
Unknown.
That was a thing, but if I had to guess one way, I'd say that. And if that's the case, that's interesting, because we know from the book of Matthew who his mom is, which is the prostitute from Jericho. So it's interesting if he has a kind of either way, whatever's going on, has he dealt with that stigma his whole life? Has he overcome that by being such a good and godly man? And maybe his mom did by being a godly woman, and people saw that. Or is he in a place where it's like, oh, maybe that's why he's not married? Either way, his character's really clear. And if it is like, oh, he has this little stain, the book of Ruth actually obscures that. It's only from Matthew that we find out who his mom was. But that's very consistent with the theme that you see in the Bible. It hits really hard in the book of Judges, which is the time frame that Ruth is, right? Every single one of the judges has something wrong with them. And they start off with things that aren't really wrong with them, not in the Lord's eyes, but in society's eyes, right? I think the first one is actually the first one, there's nothing wrong with them. I think Caleb's son, right? But then we have a left-hander, and then we got a woman. And then, you know what I mean? There's this theme of there's a stain in the eyes of the world, but not in the eyes of God on you. Anyway, I don't know where I'm going with that. Yeah. I'm just riffing. It's definitely in the right context.
In the Judges, I see that in a few for sure. But
well, as you progress, they start to have problems that are problems. Yeah. They have sin issues. Samson, being it escalates. It starts off with problems that aren't problems in the eyes of the Lord. It progresses to, oh no, this is wickedness.
Yeah. And he had a problem with his heart.
Yep.
Decision maker.
Yep. Gideon before that, where it's like he's kind of a wussy a little bit, not really trusting the Lord, but the Lord's speaking over that.
Yeah.
There's definitely a trajectory there with the judges, but
no, it was definitely in a time where the Israel wasn't doing well. I mean, there was a lot of problems, and I'll get into this a little bit in this next week, but the book of Ruth is not. It's very quiet on a lot of things that I think we would want it to say something about, like Boaz. I want to know more. But all the author of Ruth wants you to know is that Boaz is solid. Yeah. He's taking care of his own. He's taking care of himself. He's kind to his workers. Yep. He's kind to the poor. Mm-hmm. He's faithful to God's law and keeping the fringes of his property not harvested. And in Ruth 3, we get to see that he's actually aware of God's law in regards to kinsman redeemer. Yeah. And even though this woman has now laid himself at his feet that he does want, he doesn't take her in the night. he actually says, hold on, we need to follow some of God's laws and make things right before we would take a step like that. Whereas he would have had, there would have been, he could have taken Ruth sexually that night.
Yeah.
Ruth would have been happy potentially. No one would have known anything about it. No one would have thought anything about it. She has no standing, all of those things.
Yeah.
But he doesn't, which is just so honorable. He tells his guys, hey, don't you dare touch this woman. So he has, they're showing him as just a man of integrity, a man of character, a man of compassion, a man who cares, a man who knows God's law. And that's what we're really told about him, which again, I think makes it even more scandalous that he would connect himself to someone like this. Yeah. Like with the prophet, Hosea going and connecting himself to Gomer. Ultimately it's Jesus connecting himself to, the scum of the earth like us. Yeah. And Jesus connecting himself with the women of his day, the Samaritan woman, the, woman caught in adultery. Like he's just, a friend of all those. And we'll get more into that into Ruth chapter 4. I'm actually very excited about Ruth chapter 4. There's immigration questions, there's deportation questions, and we'll podcast on that next week as well. But yeah, at this point, what we know is that there's this proposal that happens in Ruth 3, and it's scandalous, but it's also so beautiful. That's what makes it so romantic. Yeah, is because there's no way this could happen. Yeah, it's Romeo and Juliet before Romeo and Juliet in some ways, but they just don't end like idiots. And kill themselves.
Well, I think, and again, the author of Ruth doesn't give us this fact, but Matthew does want us to know this, and I think it's interesting when you like from the kind of the two sides of that coin, right? The one is what you're spelling out. Wow, here's this awesome guy who is a type of Christ and an image of Christ a little bit in here as a stand-up righteous guy who's reaching down and caring for this woman and pull her up. But then you go back a generation and with the context of that character of Boaz being this righteous, solid guy who's righteous enough to be in the Bible as someone foreshadowing Jesus, and his mother was a Canaanite prostitute, which if you read between the lines, that says a heck of a lot about the conversion of his mother. You know what I mean? That she was able to raise a Boaz, that this woman who lived in the walls of Jericho, who was a prostitute and a Canaanite, that she followed Yahweh so wholly and completely that a generation later, her son is saying, "No, I'm not going to take advantage of this woman. No, I'm gonna follow the Lord and be faithful, and I'm gonna lay myself down here." That's a really, to me, I think that's really encouraging, because a lot of people are like Rahab. They're broken and dinged up, and they feel like and you see the just being stuck in that gunk generation after generation after generation. I was counseling a young couple the other day, and they were just sharing all of the gunk that they had nothing to do with bringing into their life, and yet here it's manifesting in their young marriage.
It was an inheritance.
And I told him, I said, you guys got 20 years of work to do before you can get to where a lot of people start off. And they were relieved to hear that, because it just was refreshing, I think, for them to hear that and acknowledge that and to realize that, and to pair that up with, but you guys are following Jesus. And so you're getting there, and you might get there a lot quicker, because Jesus might just boom.
The grace of God does change things.
And for a couple like that, it's like you could raise a Boaz. You know what I mean? Like I don't know how dinged up you got growing up, but like your sons, your daughters, they could be Boaz.
Yeah. And they could be Rahab too.
Yeah.
It's just second half Rahab.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rahab was amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
She just had a rough start.
Yeah, clearly.
But just so in case everybody doesn't know, so Matthew's genealogy of Jesus, kind of goes back and describes where everybody came from and how it came to that point. And so what Alec is saying is that, Rahab was from Jericho, and Rahab basically assimilated into the Jewish community. the Israelites who are on conquest of Canaan, and Boaz is linked by Matthew, the writer
son.
Matthew.
She married a man named Salmon.
To be Rahab's son.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting connection there. So Boaz, he could have had a proclivity in some ways, and sees foreigners at it differently than maybe all the other Israelites who might have a different view of them. He actually has a foreign story in his own heart and his own, with his mom and all those things. So we're not told that in the book of Ruth.
Yeah.
That's something that literally, thousands of years later comes out in the writer Matthew. But within the Jewish world, they're so big on genealogy, and the fact that Matthew could even know it 1,000 years later means that there probably was some awareness.
It's a bit of a mystery how Matthew knows that, because he is the first record of that.
Yeah.
What I've heard the conjecture is, maybe that was something that was known in Mary's family. I think that was Matthew tracking Mary, not Joseph. I can't remember which of the Gospels tracks who, but that maybe that was something was known in Mary's family. But you kind of keep it on the DL. It's a precious but vulnerable secret, to hold it kind of in the family. That's a theory. But it's so interesting because it does really line up a lot.
Matthew focused on Joseph's genealogy.
On Joseph's genealogy. Okay, so maybe something known in Joseph.
But I think that, it's funny because I was thinking about the kinsman redeemer. So you've got this alluding to Rahab that Matthew brings out, which again, whether they knew that or not, the people who are reading Ruth were not positive. But again, it wouldn't be surprising to me that there was some awareness there. The other interesting thing is Bethlehem, right? Just so here's this little couple, literally, like Boaz is sleeping out by the grain.
Yeah.
When Ruth comes and makes this proposal, and this special, unique thing happens in Bethlehem in the middle of the night, that basically is part of the genealogy of Jesus. Whereas in Bethlehem, in the middle of the night, out where potentially the grain is being stored and kept, or a manger, something really special happens in Bethlehem that is real significant for the genealogy of Jesus. Jesus is born. I don't know. So there's those little kind of really cool streams of connection, which are cool. But what I was going to say is, the kinsman redeemer reality, and I mentioned this on Sunday, but it's worth diving further into, potentially, maybe uncomfortable to dive further into. But one of the responsibilities of the Goel, which is the nearest of kin, which is the kinsman redeemer, is to, and it's Deuteronomy 25 spells it out, that if a woman that was married to one of your male relatives becomes a widow without a child, without an heir, to uphold the name, then the closest male relative is supposed to procreate with that woman.
Marry and procreate with her.
Yes, for sure. Is to procreate with that woman. And the goal of it is so that woman will have a man ultimately that can care for her and carry on the name of the father. Yeah. It's just like in our modern ears and senses, we're like, what? Yeah. That is crazy town. Now, back then, it was not only probably much more normal, for something like, it wasn't so crazy for something like that to happen in regards to the family structures and dynamics, but also it was really a provision to make sure that she's covered. Yeah. It was actually, supposed to be this beautiful offering. Instead of something, and I'm sure there was abuses of that and those type of things because of human nature, but the provision was so that they could be covered and be cared. And the reason that we know that is such an important thing, and it was viewed very differently, is going back to Tamar, right? Who is also in the genealogy of Jesus with Judah and Tamar. So Judah was one of the 12 sons of Israel. Yep. And Judah is actually the house of Israel, the tribe of Israel that Jesus ultimately came out of, and King David, same thing. But Judah, the way the story goes, did not want to perform that duty for Tamar, who was his son's wife,
daughter-in-law.
So his son's wife was widowed without an heir, without a son, and so the law, even at that point, which is pre-Moses, was to be understood that something needed to happen.
Yeah.
That she was to be able to, he was to procreate with her, which again sounds crazy to us, but again, we're talking about a different context in every way, shape, and form. So then Tamar, crazy story in the book of Genesis, she actually waits so long and gets so frustrated and so angry that she goes to a town where she knows Judah will be traveling. She dresses up as a prostitute and basically woos him in to sleep with her. And then before he's awake, she takes his staff and sneaks off. And Judah was like, I mean, so here's Judah. He's not doing what, maybe is right in their eyes at that point. He's now sleeping with a prostitute, so he's obviously giving himself in a weird direction, not in a way that he should be. And she takes off with his staff. Then the story goes that later she became pregnant. Yeah. And they're going to kill her, stone her, because that's what the law says. Yeah. And at that time. And before she's about to be stoned, she comes into Judah's tent and she says, "Here," and hands him his staff. And he goes, "Oh!" He's like, "Oh no, you're the prostitute. I'm about to stone you for sleeping, and I'm the one that made you pregnant." It's just this huge, big boom. And she's spared, and he actually says, "You are more righteous than I am." And it's funny. So here's this woman who's so desperate for an heir, so that she can have any kind of standing or anything, and she's begging and hoping and fighting for that right to be given her. It's withheld. So she goes around, sneaks around and actually fulfills that law. And then the declaration from the scriptures is that she was more righteous than Judah. Yeah. And she spared, and she becomes part of the genealogy of Jesus. Yeah. Crazy, crazy stuff there. But again, the point of it is how important this law was. Yeah. And so now Naomi is saying, hey, this is a law that's been with the people of God. Ruth, you should take advantage of it. Now, she's not telling Ruth, again, we're not sure exactly what the connotation of everything is, but she's telling Ruth, get yourself fancied up. Doesn't seem to be saying go prostitute yourself. Yeah. Go meet him in the middle of the night after this party and uncover his feet and lay down at his feet. And it could be, and it doesn't seem, Ruth's not saying, but it could be a similar type thought where go get yourself pregnant and then maybe we have hope. Which, again, Tamar's story seemed to be said as like this was a right thing. Now, obviously, hopefully things could be done way better
going on there.
In this situation, you almost have the redemption of that story where Boaz, instead of prostituting himself, he says, no, we need to follow God's commands. And actually, I want to cover you too, so why don't you leave before everybody gets up? So there doesn't have to be any of that extra stuff. Yeah. Everyone's doing it in the right way this time. So that's in some ways why it's a beautiful, beautiful story.
Yeah, that's really good. I hadn't connected those dots before. Loosely, you know what I mean? But yeah. I think you're pulling on a real
We're
solid
going
thread
deep
there.
into Ruth right now. Yeah.
Well, and I think it's very much, and then there's so much of Ruth that's doing that. It's so much of Ruth sits in the context of the entirety of Scripture. Like you said, it's like a really good spinoff. It's almost like
it's deep.
Wicked. Have you seen?
No.
Have you seen Wicked? You haven't seen it?
Mm-mm.
What's so interesting if you see Wicked, right? You've seen Wizard of Oz. And what they did in the play Wicked is they just took every tiny little silly detail of the Wizard of Oz and they gave it good backstory. And so it's like, where'd the slippers come from? Why is her name, what it is? Where do the monkeys come from? Yeah. Where does the, like every little thing gets backstory. And it makes it like weirdly rich. That's why people love it so much, because it's like one of the best, most thorough backstories to a well-beloved story.
All these dots.
And Ruth, in a lot of ways, is doing that. You know what I mean? I think CJ and I talked about a little bit how Ruth chapter 1, this covenant being made in the wilderness, and it's a covenant of chesed, you know, of loyal generosity, right? And I had read something about, and I don't remember who, but some rabbi talking about Ruth being the Torah of Hesed, the giving of Hesed, in the same way that the Torah is given in the desert place. You have this covenant that's made between God and his people right there in the desert. Here we have this covenant that's made between Ruth and God and Naomi. But it's a covenant of that Hesed, which again ties back to God declaring who he is, the Lord, slow to anger, abounding in Hesed, you know. So you have so much of that. And I even mentioned in my sermon on that too, you know, Ruth's name being the Hebrew word picture for her name being the person nailed to the cross. And I picked up on it. I mentioned Judah and Tamar briefly, but even that was cueing me into this reality. I think what I had said was something along the lines of, like, in the Bible, for the most part, wherever you find a woman trapped in her shame, you find the man nailed to the cross. And so there you go, even more so than I had seen in this moment between Boaz and Ruth of like, well, here it is. It's a redemption of that moment.
Well, in case it's lunchtime for you out there, or whenever you listen to this, one of the images that's come into my mind is this like 7-layered cake, right?
Ooh.
So when you look at this cake, it's beautiful. You know, you've got the frosting, you've got whatever's on top, you got the shape of it. And I don't know what your mind is doing, but mine's a round shape. Mine's got some white frosting in it. And it's got Rogue One on top. No, just kidding. It's got something on top, and it just looks delicious, and it's real tall, you know. And you know, we used to watch this show with my girls, you know, some baking shows or whatever, and sometimes they would say, all right, I want you to make a 7-layered cake, but each layer had to be a different, you know, kind of like cookies and cream, vanilla, chocolate. This one has to be mousse. This, like, they're all different layers. And then everyone, you know, and it's so challenging to make them all right and make them all stand up. But the people who could do it well, then you would cut into that, right? You'd cut a slice out of that and pull it out, and you would see, you know, on the good cakes, like these perfect lines.
Yeah.
But each one was so different. And then when you taste it, you're just going, holy moly.
Yeah.
Like, you're tasting all these different things. And that really, these 4 chapters of this book of Ruth is exactly that. Like, as a whole, it's just this beautiful picture.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful story of romance and kind of like, you know, tragedy that becomes triumph in some ways. But then, like you said, it's if you pull a slice of that out, I mean, you just have, you know, Boaz's deeper story. You have Ruth's deeper story. And you even alluded to in your message the Moabite reality. So, I mean, Ruth is a Moabite, and that's significant because basically the name Moab came out of incest. Yeah, right?
Pretty much means.
So Lot, who wanted to go to Sodom and Gomorrah, wanted that area, and he was Abraham's nephew. And God's judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah comes, and everybody's wiped out except for Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters. Yeah, they flee because the angel tells them to, and they get out of there. You're forgetting
an important precursor to it, right? With the angels, and he's got angels show up into Sodom. I didn't have time to mention this in my sermon on it, but the angels show up to Lot's house and say, "Hey, we should leave," and the men of Sodom say, "Hey, let's go sexually assault the angels," and Lot says, "Nah, here's my daughters instead." The men, fortunately for Lot's daughters, say, "Nah, we're not interested in that," you know, and then, you know, skip forward a little bit, then they escape, and that's
so they're running out of town, and the wife looks back, you know, longingly or whatever, and she turns to a pillar of salt. So we have that story. So now their entire livelihood, their entire existence, their entire town, their entire village, whatever it was, completely destroyed. And now Lot and his 2 daughters are pictured living, they're just out there in the wilderness in some sort of tent, and they don't know what to do. And the daughters are like, we're in trouble. There's no men for us anymore. We're all going to die out here and have nothing left. So they come up with a plan. Why don't we get dad drunk and we'll sleep with him and we'll get pregnant from him. And then we'll at least have, hopefully some family to go forward with.
Yeah.
So that, and one of the sons that's born is Moab. So that's where Moab comes. And again,
which means from the seed of my father.
The cultural realities are, we can't even try, we can attempt to try and understand the cultural context, but it's basically so Martian. It's so different, this ancient reality. But that's a layer of the cake, right? Yeah. There's just all of these layers. And it's funny, it's a bad analogy on a cake because some of those layers, they're not like Oreo. Yeah. They're like poop or something. Yeah. It's like horrible layers. But instead God weaves it all together into the grand narrative where it's just everything is now beautiful. Yeah. All of it is redeemed. That's the beautiful story. It's redeeming love. Yeah. It's redeeming love. It's not just kindness. It's not just loyal generosity, but it's the kind that actually undoes and reverses and restores what has been wronged and eaten. And so now this Moabite woman is exalted, as the mother of David, even though it's great-great-grandmother, whatever, and the great-great-great-great-grandmother of Jesus. It's unbelievably amazing.
And I think just to, like you said, it's hard for us to understand. I think one thing that has been going through my mind that might help some people get past that stumbling block, some of the stumbling blocks for the story of us, where you're like, wait, this is a good thing. She's going to marry this old guy. And, and then, and why is everybody trying so hard to get kids? And like women are so like, they're like, nah, this is like, it's like nails on a chalkboard to our modern Western ears a little bit. But I think one of the things that's helpful in understanding is that, and we've talked about it, but in our context, marriage is primarily, for right and for wrong, we primarily view marriage as a fulfillment of love, like the foundation of marriage to be love. Some of that's really wonderful. Some of it's actually pretty immature. In their context, for right and for wrong, just like ours, I don't think it would be untrue to say that marriage was viewed primarily as stability and security
and future.
So it's where I'm going to get kids who will care for me, because there's no social security. There's no hope. I don't live in an abundant scenario. I only have abundance if I have people to help me build that abundance and maintain it. I have a husband to keep me safe from assault. Like, that's stability there. Love, way low on the list, and we're familiar with the trope of, like I just watched Mulan the other night, like duty, like kind of in the arranged marriage movie trope of like, oh, it's primarily about duty. But I would say probably in that culture, we're primarily looking for stability. And the reality is for what it's worth, marriage is supposed to be all of those things. But if I would pick one foundational thing, I would probably say covenant. And that's what the Lord is trying to teach his people. It's about covenant. It's about hesed. It's about faithful loyalty.
It's about family.
But it produces family. It produces children. It's about being fruitful and multiplying. It is about love. It is about stability. It does all of those
things. Love
things.
Is not an emotion that makes you feel tingly.
Yeah, but it's meant context, to say this is what it looks like between God and us.
And that too is just another, reality of what we're dealing with today. I mean, you mentioned the whole idea of having children. You'd have someone to take care of you when you were old. Yeah. I mean, that was your retirement policy there. And because we've created these, worlds where you can depend on money to take care of you when you're old, it's another breakdown of family. Yeah. Even though it's like, what? No, how could, like, that's right. It's good and right. Well, no, I mean, the biblical model, is family takes care of family. Mm-hmm. And so there's nothing wrong with storing up, treasure for that day. But if the storing up of the treasure is causing you to be less dependent on your family, then maybe there is something wrong with it. And, I was just reading this morning again about family before the Industrial Revolution. Mm-hmm. I mean, what the challenges were so different because family was still a necessity. Yeah. to have any existence.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a different reality. Once the Industrial Revolution happened, family is not a necessity for existence, even though for your soul it is,
Yeah.
but for your actual functionality it's not. And so now things have changed a lot, and there's just been continual breakdown of family. And I think that's historically what happens to a world power is
Mm-hmm.
you break down family enough, you have no foundation for society.
Yeah.
Your society goes away.
Yep.
Until you can get back to, because family is God's plan. I mean, that's what God made creation, and then he made family to make sure creation is okay.
Yeah.
And as soon as you get rid of family, you you go into chaos. You're back to tohu vabohu.
Yeah.
And we're as a nation, we're toying with that more and more all the time. And it's cool because I do think there's always the renewal and the retreat. Like there's the revival and the retreat.
Yep.
Like there are some real revival of family and God's plan and even just God. There's a lot of revival, people heading back towards that, while there's also still a lot of people running away from that. And definitely technology is not, helping us with family.
Yeah.
But Ruth is another reminder of families where it's at. Family is God's plan.
Yeah, for sure. Did you have anything else that didn't make it into the message that you wanted to squeeze out?
There's so many things that I'm still and again, some of them will sneak into this next week. But as far as Ruth 3 goes, I was going to sing a song.
Oh.
But I actually bumped it to this week because we had so many announcements.
Oh, good. I was going to say, I'm sad we missed that.
So we're going to sing a little camp song this time. And
song.
some of it has to do with, it's going to be 3 different parts. And when all the parts together, it's really beautiful. And that's kind of the layers of Ruth. Little allusion to that. Kanaf. I guess we didn't really talk about that word, but the word covering.
Yeah, you hit it a little bit.
Well, I hit it hard in the message, but there's just way more to talk about. And one of the things that that's a Hebrew word, so that's the Old Testament is written in Hebrew, and that kanaf word it doesn't mean covering. Yeah. But what it means is like edge, or it's kind of like extension, but the way that it's translated is either garment or wings. So that's why the word covering makes sense, because it's always translated as, someone covering with a garment. So the kanaf is what she says is will you, in one translation, spread your wings, and that's the word kanaf. And then another translation is will you put your garment over me, which Ruth says to Boaz while after she's uncovered his feet. So that's where the idea of covering comes from. And 2 things on that. One is the uncovering of his feet is an interesting thing, and that's actually a part of the tradition of the closest relative, the kinsman redeemer. And we see that in the next chapter where the guy who basically says, I don't want Ruth, I don't want to, use my right to take over Elimelech's property, which includes Ruth, is he takes off his sandal. So he uncovers his feet, basically saying, I'm saying no to this. And so when Ruth is uncovering his feet, he's saying, will you, stay uncovered and keep me uncovered, or will you cover me? And so his extension ultimately doesn't happen until chapter 4, as he covers her. Like he does not uncover his feet or leave his feet uncovered or leave Ruth uncovered. So there's
probably also the weird little practical bit, right? If he's asleep and now his feet are cold.
That he'll wake
I've always
up.
wondered about that. Yeah, but I mean, not at all in conflict with that imagery.
Yeah.
But I've often wondered that of like, oh yeah, like he's sleeping.
No.
Now his feet are cold.
It's much deeper than
But
that.
for sure. But functional too.
But the covering idea, this is something I just want to bring out, and I think it doesn't necessarily pertain to Ruth, but it is a way that I've kind of walked things out in our own understanding of covering here at Living Streams, right? So in the book of Ruth, you've got Naomi feeling uncovered because her husband and her sons die, so she no longer has covering. Ruth provides, Ruth joins her, like they join together. And in some ways, Ruth's providing covering, but more so Ruth's providing solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
And then Naomi is saying, hey, I really, don't know what to do. But when she sees this opportunity with Boaz, she says, hey, this is an opportunity for us to receive covering.
Mm-hmm.
And you in particular, Ruth, because ultimately what she told Ruth and Orpah, the daughters-in-law before, was go home to your own families and find your own, covering. And Ruth saying, no, I'll stay uncovered with you, Naomi, which is kind of cool. And so then when Naomi starts to get her mass nature tingling going on, she's like, Boaz could be a covering for you, Ruth, which ultimately could be a covering for me too. And so they go through this process of trying to receive covering. Boaz doesn't act on his own accord, but he goes to the 10 elders at the gate who are providing covering for that community. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately we see God providing covering with King David and King Jesus over everyone. So that was the illusion of covering. But it goes further because, the question that has come to me oftentimes is, what are the elders at Living Streams?
Yeah.
And why do we only have male elders? Mm-hmm. And what is the role of elder? And what is the role of elder? And we have all this spelled out in scriptures, but there's the challenge of just going, why can't there be a woman elder? And again, I don't, I know of other churches who have a woman that they call an elder and all those things, and I'm not actually, I don't feel any obligation to go and challenge that or anything like that. But it's just as for me in my house kind of deal. Mm-hmm. The word covering has always been what I've finally landed on to say, I think it is the role of an elder to be a covering. And I think, women, I've seen my wife provide great covering for my kids and for me, all the things. So it's not that they can't, but I think there's a biblical prescription that's true Old Testament, which again is a little trickier contextually to apply all those things. It's true in the New Testament, which again is tricky to apply contextually, but I think it's less tricky. Mm-hmm. But then there's just this constant idea is that the men are supposed to provide a covering.
Yeah.
And in some ways, that's the first line of defense. In some ways, that's the, we will take the hits. We will take this to that. And I think there's a physiology reality to some extent. Obviously, there's anomalies and all of that. But that's kind of the thing that, I was thinking in the back of my mind. It was like, here's another, I think, thing that points to that same thing where, again, it's not a devaluing of women in any way, shape, or form. It's not saying that women couldn't provide a better covering or whatever. There's no devaluing of women in the book of Ruth. But it's just there's these different roles, and in some ways it's this beautiful extension of manhood. Yeah. When we provide covering as a husband, as a father, as an elder in a community, as an elder in a church, whatever it might be. I think there's a real role that God is longing to see men do in that regard. That isn't bigotry. Yeah. That isn't toxic masculinity. That isn't a devaluing of women. And I know our culture we're bad at the complexities, and so we just want to hate things. But that's a lot.
Well, we tend to think of covering as authoritarianism.
Yeah. No way.
But again, that's from our perspective, which is not the perspective of the Bible. Yeah. When the Bible is written in and primarily to honor shame cultures, and so covering from end to end of the Bible is talking about covering shame. Yeah. It's talking about giving honor. Yeah. You know what I mean? I mean, when God covers Adam and Eve, what is he doing in the beginning of Genesis? When he gives them those animal skins and covers them, he's not being an authoritarian in that moment. In fact, quite the opposite. He's actually just allowed them to do the one thing he told them not to do. And then they messed up, and he is mitigating the consequences of that by covering their shame. And what does Jesus do when he covers us in his blood? He's doing the exact same thing. Yeah. There was nothing authoritarian about the cross, about Jesus covering himself in his blood.
It was mysteriously submissive.
Yeah, he didn't come in and say, "Look, guys, you guys suck. I'm going to the Holy Spirit will possess you and you'll be my robots and and follow my law from here on until forever. In fact, quite the opposite, though he could have done that. He could puppet master us if he wanted to, certainly. He's never done that. He's never been authoritarian. He's only given us covering and said, here's my law. It will lead to life. Shoot, you didn't hear me, you didn't listen, you didn't obey, you didn't follow. Let me mitigate the consequences of that with my own blood. Yeah. And so, for the biblical call for a man to cover a woman is not, that dad tells everybody how it's going to be, and and that's all there is to it, and there's no debate about it. The biblical call for a man to cover is much more when your family, when your wife, when your kids, when whoever, when they fail, when they're shamed, you show up and you bear that weight and you intervene and you cover their shame and enable them to move forward, not in shamefulness, but to move forward in your honor, but really hopefully ultimately in Jesus's honor. Yeah.
And the only other thing on covering in that regard, I just, was so impressed by the Spirit. And I said this at the end of the message, the whole idea of margin. Like God's calling us each to hide ourselves, male and female, under his covering. Mm-hmm. No doubt about it. Whatever your background is, he's Boaz inviting us to come under his wings and be covered, which is such a beautiful thing. But then he's also calling us to be a covering for others. Mm-hmm. And, I had 5 different ways that we could understand who God might be asking us to cover. But one of those things is if we don't have margin in our lives, we're just not going to be covering in the way that we need to. And that's the picture of the field, right? Yeah. Don't harvest the edges of your field because God wants those for the poor. So Boaz not maximizing every single facet of his life, but leaving some of it, leaving space for God, and some of it was a way that God was covering the poor through Boaz. And if every field did that, then, they're good to go there. And so I think that whole idea of margin has just been something that God's always bringing me back to, because I'm a little bit like overzealous, and I try and be very productive. Yeah. And try and maximize everything. And by God's grace, we as Living Streams organization, as Living Streams Church, as a nonprofit organization, it's really cool because we tithe 10%. Mm-hmm. Everything that comes in, we leave a margin for missions, for whatever else comes out. And in particular this year, God's graciousness and the generosity, the loyal generosity of the people of Living Streams, and then our frugality in some ways, our discipline to make sure there's margins, we've been able to cover a lot of different things. We've been able to cover people who are stuck, with legal fees for their documentation. Yeah. In some really awesome ways. We've been able to cover other churches who've gotten into some financial challenges. We've been able to cover people with food pantry. We've been able to cover people who've aged out of foster care. The list just goes on and on and on. Covering people who might be short on rent. It's just so awesome. And I love that that's something that the Buckleys just wove in at the very beginning. 10% is just going to be not consumed by us. Yeah. And I think that's a good practice to model, because I think in our own lives, 10% of maybe our own finances. Mm-hmm. And again, we should have a discussion on this. I've been debating in my mind, so if someone is in debt, should they still tithe? It's just kind of a wild question where there's a part of me that, there's most of me that's just been leaning towards, I think yes, because we want to put first things first, and you want to give to God and then give out of that. And yet, I could almost, see some arguments saying, well, that 10% going to that debt, but then again, it's like we can abuse that and make that weird, and now we're putting money above God, and so there's a real challenge in all that regard. But the whole idea is we have to have margin. And again, when you're in debt, that's why it's impossible to have margin in some ways, because every margin you have, needs to go to the debt. Yeah. So that's why we got to start with margin. But if you're in debt, how do you get out of that to a place of margin? That's between you and the Lord, and and your wise counsel.
I would say
in
though,
our week, right, 1/7 of our time is the Sabbath. There's just always these, God's saying margin. In our American sensibilities are saying maximize. We're always wrestling with that.
Yeah. I would say, just to engage that question of debt versus tithe, and the Bible says to give our first fruits to the Lord. So I think the first thing you do before you pay Uncle Sam, before you pay your debts, before you pay any of that, is you give that tithe, because that is I think the biblical assumption is that, and in the way
Old
the
Testament,
prophets, for sure, talk about it, is this belongs to the Lord. So it's not even, the Bible talk when the people in I forget which of the prophets, but when the people aren't tithing, the way the prophets speak of it is you're stealing from the Lord. You're robbing what belongs to the Lord. So this 10%, I think the assumption is that this 10% isn't, although it is you giving it to the Lord, it's not you giving it to the Lord. It's giving the Lord what is his and not taking. So I think when we take from the Lord to give to our debtor, I hear what you're saying. It's not a crazy thought, you know what I mean? Of like, but the Bible's also very clear, like pay your debts, But I think it's a bit more of, hey, our relationship with God. Part of that is we give him what's his, and then beyond that is, and then we have when you have a debt, wisdom is get out of that.
Yeah, and I'm on that team.
But yeah,
I'm on the same team. But when Jesus
though.
says, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's," he was saying, this money belongs to Caesar, so you should give it to him and give God yourself.
Yeah,
right. And so that's where there's just that other side where, and again, all this stuff needs to be worked out in community with wise counsel and the scriptures and all these things. But that's just something I've been wrestling with.
And a case by case guiding of the Holy Spirit, like Hanukkah is in part celebrating the people of Israel went to war on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, and felt like they were following the Lord. And I think probably were, like David taking the showbread,
Well, it's not, and in the end, it's not like God needs money. So
exactly.
Throughout the Old Testament, the offerings weren't money. The offerings were, either first fruits, like literally of the harvest, or it was an animal of the flock. And so obviously what if you don't have anything? Like, what if you don't have any flocks, you don't have any fruit, you don't have any money? Is God saying, I'm going to punish you because you're not giving me?
Because you're poor.
No, you can give him yourself. You can give him time. You can give him attention. You can give yourself you can volunteer a certain amount of hours, and you can calculate those hours as, tithe time. If for some reason you're in a place where you cannot give any monetary funds because of no income or too much debt. That's where I don't know. Like Jesus always said, be careful not to put too heavy a thing on people's backs,
the Lord is
and then
pragmatic.
Not lay a finger. And so, again, for me as a pastor too, who's basically Living Streams is dependent on people believing in tithe and giving to the Lord in that regard. And I'm here challenging that a little bit, but I don't know. I just want people to be following the Spirit, be free in the Lord, be submitted to the scriptures, and to figure out what God's calling them to do.
Yeah. Practically, it's like,
and if you're not sure, 10% to the Lord, first and foremost, it's easy.
Default tithe.
Yeah.
And if the Lord is giving you freedom, I would say default to your church, unrestricted, not to whatever ministry you want to ever. But if you're not, if you don't think you should tithe to your church, I don't know why you're there. Default unrestricted to that 10% off the top, but it's God's rule. He you said, he wants your heart. If the Lord is giving you freedom, otherwise, go otherwise. You know what I mean? He'll give you freedom. He's not, he's not legalistic and weird about that.
Yeah.
But just don't let it be because you don't feel the freedom in your circumstances. You know what I mean? Because the Lord is probably wanting to do something in you much more than he's wanting your money. Or I'd say,
and the truth is God is wanting to get you out of debt.
Yeah.
He wants to set the captive free. And debt, no matter how the credit card companies make you think about it, it's slavery.
Yeah.
It is 100% slavery, and it's not God's best plan for you. Now, again, there's asset-based state, there's toxic debt, there's all those type of things. But God wants us free.
Yeah.
And God wants us to have margin
Mm-hmm.
for ministry.
Yeah.
Margin for caring for people, margin for him, to minister to the Lord. And that was the big thing that I felt like the Spirit was just driving home to me and sharing with the congregation is we got to be people of margin, because this world, there's just so much brokenness out there, so much need, so many people hurting, and God wants us to have margin so that we can cover.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not supposed to cover everything. We're just supposed to love our neighbor. We're just supposed to cover the ones that God is calling us to cover.
Yeah.
And if we do that well, I mean, if the billion Christians will get that right, the whole world could be covered.
Yeah. Yeah.
At least in some way, shape, and form. And I think the church is actually doing a pretty good job of that.
Mm-hmm.
But, we got to stay faithful. Those who are doing it got to stay faithful. Those who are slacking, step up, get some margin, and
that's good.
Start letting the Lord use it.
That's good. It's a good place to land the plane, I feel like. So, well, if you're still hanging with us, thank you so much. We love chatting with you guys, and connecting with you on Sundays. And so go ahead and follow us on whatever social media, whatever media you're listening to us right now. And we will look forward to seeing you on Sunday.